John, today we're talking about the book Dare to Lead by Berné Brown. I have to say, Berné Brown is absolutely, in my opinion, the number one influencer on vulnerability. I watched her podcast. It wasn't a podcast, it was a TED Talk. I think it was from 2010 or so, where she's wearing a brown shirt. It's a 20-minute TED Talk. It went viral. I gotta say, since that time of her TED Talk, she's been on the leading edge of bringing vulnerability to commonplace. Now we sit around and go, oh yeah, we should be more vulnerable. And we talk about it on our podcast. Like vulnerability is just a common phrase that we get to throw around. At the time she exposed her research, it was not a common phrase. It was actually something that was difficult to talk about.
Yeah, I did see that TED Talk as well, actually. It was really good. And you know what's interesting, Rich? It seems like along with these new generations of the workplace, the entrepreneurs had to evolve and change along with it. And so what you just pointed out is very interesting. I didn't connect the dots that her TED Talk and that going viral was the beginning of the conversation of vulnerability. I just know, to your point, we talk about it a lot. I didn't know
Yeah.
that it really started with that. And what's interesting about vulnerability in general, if you think back to the large corporations and the big offices, and when you're at a company for 20 years, you get the gold Rolex watch or whatever the pension plan is. And in those environments, you just watch it on TV. It was a different business climate, it was a different business culture. And entrepreneurs have had to evolve, leaders have had to evolve regarding not just vulnerability, but their level of empathy, the level of trust they build within an organization, the values they have in the organization. All those things have really evolved to form a new age leader. And by the way, I think it's going to keep changing. People now working from home instead of being in the office all the time, being able to have conversations like this with your team and building up, that's not as easy as seeing people face to face in a room. And so I think that leader is going to have to continue to evolve. And so therefore, I think our principles are very apropos for today's leader.
You had talked about the era of a gold watch, and I earmarked a number of quotes in this book that we don't need to spend a lot of time on all of them, but I'd like to spend some time on many of them. You, in saying that, had me flip to one of the areas in the book on page 131, where it identifies some of the symptoms of a business culture which uses shame. I
Hmm.
want to read a bunch of them to you because I think some of the gold watch era had some of this. Perfectionism. If you have perfectionism in your culture, there's probably a little bit of shame in your culture. Favoritism, gossiping, back channeling, comparison, self worth tied to productivity, harassment, discrimination, power over versus power with, bullying, blaming, teasing, and cover ups. Those are all things that would demonstrate there's something in the culture that's not working. If I flip over to page 43, she says, show me a culture in which vulnerability is framed as weakness, which all of those would have vulnerability and shame as a weakness. Those are symptoms of it. Show me a culture which vulnerability is framed as weakness, and I'll show you a culture struggling to come up with fresh ideas and new perspectives.
I can give you a couple right now. You said, show me, I'll show you. Military, government, right? Who in Washington is vulnerable? Yeah, I really made a mistake. I shouldn't have done that. There's some areas there that, and that's why I think a lot of people are just having a really hard time with that inauthentic leadership that's going on. So, yeah, those are cultures. I think a lot of those words, of course, blaming and some of the shaming, bullying, things like that. But there are some elements in there that I don't necessarily connect with as maybe as much as the quote was like in the right frame, trying to do better at what you're doing and to always constantly be improving is a level of perfectionism. You always want to get better and better and faster at what you do and productivity. There's some elements in there I don't necessarily need to tie to shaming, but the concept of being more vulnerable and open and having empathy ties all into that.
She actually speaks to, and I'm having a hard time flipping to that page. It wasn't one I earmarked, but I had some underlines on it. Perfectionism is a symptom of armoring up so you can believe that you're enough. So you can't be judged. So you can't be criticized because if I get it perfectly, then I'm going to be okay. I'm going to be accepted. So
Mm.
I agree with you in always getting better.
Yeah,
But the straight up perfectionism that I'm not enough unless it's perfect, I think is where she's referencing.
I
Let,
understand
let, let,
that.
let me draw back. Do you remember? I know you remember because we've commented on it several times. Randy Soma, who wrote the book Leadership, which was all about you have the values on the wall, but there are different decisions that are being made actually in a boardroom table. And in the boardroom table, it was all about profit, not the values. And I remember we ended that podcast by asking him, what's the solution? And it was actually rather deflating, his answer. He said, well, it's pervasive. In other words, there's probably not really a solution. John, I think I have a solution in Berné's book here. I want to read it to you.
Okay.
There's probably not a single act at work that requires more vulnerability than holding people responsible for ethics and values, especially when you're alone in it and there's a lot of money, power, or influence at stake. She speaks about that as, let me go back to the beginning. There's probably not a single act at work that requires more vulnerability. So she's saying one of the keys to the Randy Soma leadership is embracing the vulnerability involved and being one of the people at the boardroom table who says, this is not actually following our core values, where everybody else was willing to not follow them, and how vulnerable that can be to be that person.
Yeah. We have some really, to the point of Randy's book and to the point I made about government as an example, we have really bad leadership examples on the TV every night or in the stories that we read. Makes me think back to the day where you and I were going to write our first book called The World's Worst Boss,
Yes.
and how you can be a really bad leader. And we also talk a lot, Rich, about core values, and Bernie talks a lot about core values and how important they are and how they need to resonate with the entrepreneur, how you need to hire to the core values in your organization, and then hold people accountable to it in a very effective manner. The ability to have a culture where you can address those conflicts, where you can look at somebody across the table, whether it be your superior or somebody that works for you or your colleague, and say, hold on a second. At this company, we always abide by these core values because that's the culture that's here. And therefore, Rich, I think you need to reconsider maybe your thoughts. I don't think it aligns with our core values. Just to be able to have that conflict conversation is what Brene talks about. But in that boardroom, or a lot of times, leaders don't create that environment. You have to have that environment where you, as the leader, display your vulnerability to be challenged openly by a team and go, you know what? And you do this a lot, Rich. You know what? I'm reconsidering. That's a really good point you're making. I don't think I got that right. Thank you for bringing that to my attention. Team, please always bring this to my attention. And you create that culture of it's okay to be challenged. It's okay, as Aaron Deal would say, to fail. You go, you know what? That was a mistake. We made a mistake. We're going to pivot over here. And the respect you gain is really strong. And I had a hard time. I think I mentioned this to you before. I had a really hard time with vulnerability early in my entrepreneurial career.
Same.
And I wanted to be that authority, credibility. Yeah. And in times of when the going gets tough and you got to run the ship in wartime, if you will, sometimes that's needed to be tough and strong. And okay, we got to do this. And here's what we're going to do. And you're going to make decisions. But there's also a time where you earn so much more respect and you can build a much better culture if you dare to lead the way Brene talks.
I found there, I actually did earmark it on perfectionism. And I wonder if that's one of the things, I know it's one of the things that I was battling against, and maybe you too, where you wanted to avoid vulnerability because the ideal was perfectionism. It was having the answers. She says, and this is on page 79, perfectionism is at its core about trying to earn approval. Most perfectionists grew up being praised for achievement and performance. Somewhere along the way, they adopted this dangerous and debilitating belief system. I am what I accomplish and how well I accomplish it. So when you have that belief system that
Yep.
I am an accumulation of all of my accreditation at work or that people see, that's visible. When you believe that, yeah, you don't want to show where you're unknowing. I got to say, John, I have found it so liberating to be able to say, I'm very clear about what I'm strong at, and I'm equally clear about what I'm not strong at. One of the things that does is it allows other people to say what they're also not strong at. Because I'm not standing up saying, I'm perfect and you should be too. And when you're not, I'm going to catch you. I'm going to call you on it. When we embrace our own imperfections, as well as this isn't about running around and being a martyr. Oh, I'm bad at this. I'm bad at this. I'm bad at this. I'm bad at this. This is just about equal clarity on what we're good at as to what we're not good at, so that
Yep.
we can work with the people in our business who will say the same thing, and we can actually use each other's talents where we're not good. And we can work with our teams to cover up where each other aren't good. And I say cover up, be more productive, to play people
Yeah.
to their strengths.
I think, Rich, a lot of this in my mind just resonates with servant leadership. And the timing to which Ruth Lund, who's one of our early podcast guests, she taught me the concept of servant leadership from the book Integrity from Henry Cloud. And what I learned about the word integrity and servant leadership plays into this conversation. Prior to really understanding what servant leadership even meant, I was not vulnerable. I felt like I had to know it all. I felt like I had to always be on and so on and so forth. And I was put in a role in a logistics company, not knowing anything about logistics. And I had 1,500 people reporting to me. I was the vice president of operations for a logistics company. How am I going to do that job? I know nothing about logistics. And Ruth introduced, you got to be a servant leader. You work for them. Flip the org chart upside down. So work with your regional directors and your facilities managers. And all you got to do is, hey, how can I help support your role? And in that situation, Rich, I learned I didn't need to have the answers to lead people. And I actually took that a step further when I was leading people in situations I knew what to do. I still took the approach of how can I best serve you as
Yeah.
this leader, as opposed to here's what you need to do. And that created that level of trust that is talked about. It created that level of relationship. And when stuff got tough, when the situation happened or we had different crises going on or whatever, the people I was leading would turn to me and go, okay, what do we do? Knowing that I don't know anything about logistics. But I was able to then step up a little bit and have those conversations of, okay, we have a challenging time. Here's what we're going to do. Let's get the, and I was able to instill confidence in them because they knew that I was with them and we had built up that trust and that relationship. So just everything you were talking about there just really connects with me on servant leadership. And the other piece is the word integrity. As a leader, sometimes the word integrity to people, if you ask them, hey, define integrity, it's don't lie, cheat, steal. Okay, deliver what you promised. Okay, that sounds good. But integrity is also being your authentic self.
Yeah.
Integrity is also living to your core values. Integrity is also being able to have tough conversations effectively with people and tell them the truth and face to face, not behind their back. It's the ability to have empathy for others and really understand what they're going through. That's a lot of what integrity really is when you really deep dive into the word integrity and what that really means. And I feel like if that understanding of what integrity really means, and you ask an entrepreneur, do you have integrity? Yeah, I have integrity. But do they practice it? Do they display it to build that trust in the organization?
Yeah. When I think of integrity, it actually reminds me of what the table group definition for politics is in a company,
What
which
is,
you have politics when the conversation changes depending on who's in the room.
yeah, I remember that.
What when what you say changes depending on who's in the room. And there's something around integrity, there's something around authenticity that if you're going to change what you're saying, if somebody else were in the room, there's something inauthentic. There's something not integrity based about that. A couple of times you brought up having conflict or having difficult conversations. I want to highlight in the book on page 63, she says, we have to have hard conversations even when we're not ready. I find that to be very true. And she also, and I can't quote the page, but I know she also talks about uh, particularly a male response to having stress is to run away, to leave it, or run through it, to bulldoze it. And the hardest, most vulnerable thing you can do is just sit in it.
Yeah.
When I say sit in it, sit in the discomfort of a conversation that is difficult and just be in it without having to be all knowing and power through and overpower the person in front of us, and without cutting the conversation short. So we just agree to disagree, and then you cut the conversation, just staying in it. And while we're staying in it, there's another piece on page 89 from her is practice calm in the sea of anxiety. While we're in it, practicing being calm, it's a practice to be calm in a sea of anxiety and not run through it and not retreat from it, just be in it.
Yeah. It's fundamental ability is what connects with me on that, right? What we learned back in our days at College Pro Painters. It's when the world is going like this for you, something's going on, there's anxiety, there's stress, there's something happening. You have to control your emotions and your emotional state to be a little more even keeled. And what an amazing tool that has been for me as an entrepreneur over the past 30 years to learn that in college.
And fundamental ability, let's just define for others also, and we know what we're talking about, is the ability to regulate mood.
Correct.
Do you have the ability that in this sea of anxiety that you can practice calm?
Yeah.
And when things are moving so fast for everyone else
Yeah.
in a stressful situation, can you conduct yourself in a way that things slow down for you so you can make sense of things and make a good decision next?
Yeah, Rich, can I give a parallel here, which is very interesting? It's just coming to me as we're talking. One effective tool that I've learned
Yeah, please.
is if you can be what we just talked about, vulnerable with people and practice effective empathy and caring about people, and you can build trust with them and you're helping them achieve their different goals and everything. Certainly it's very easy with that trust being built up to have a tough conversation with them because they've seen you be vulnerable, they've seen you care about them, and having that tough conversation is pretty good. And like that, when there's a crisis and they look at you and go, you're the leader, sometimes you need to step up and go, okay, here's where we're going to effectively handle this conflict. We're going to, this situation, this challenge, okay, I'm on. And it makes me think through a little bit. There's been a few moments in my life I'm just thinking through where there was a crisis, right? And the feedback after the crisis was, holy cow, you jumped into action. You put a plan together. We all followed the plan. We all were like, we were so bought in to, okay, lead us here, help us, because we have this crisis. And when it was done, I went back to being servant leader again and vulnerable again and empathy. But when it was time to go, because we had a challenging situation that was there, you still need to be a strong leader. It makes me think of tonality, right? If you talk with the same tone the whole time, you might
Yeah.
be boring. But if I talk with different tonality and I up and down, and so as a leader, sometimes you got to keep people on their toes. And to a certain degree, if you lead all the time, I know what I'm talking about, follow me, we're doing that. You're not you lose effectiveness, right? If you have this authoritarian kind of leadership style, we get tired of it. You also need to be able to display you're the leader for a reason because you'll guide people the right way when it's time to overcome a challenge or a difficult situation that's happening or something like that. So that's been really effective for me is that the ability to turn it on, turn it off, turn it on, turn it off, but then also keep the level state. I've had a person say to me once, it was probably a great compliment, I thought. They said, you know what, this building could be on fire. I could knock on your door and say, hey, John, the building's on fire and everybody's running. I'd be like, okay. And I'd shut down my computer and I'd walk out, right? Maybe not if I'm on the top floor of the building, but you get the point. It was their perspective was the calmness, the ability to regulate that mood and be stable really has a stabilizing effect for the team.
When you talk about this duality of it's okay to be uncertain and it's okay to express vulnerability, and then there are times when it we need a decision maker.
Yeah.
We need somebody who's going to lead. as you were talking, it reminded me, I earmarked on page 139. Berné says, so often when someone is in pain, we're afraid to say, yes, this hurts. Yes, this is a big deal. Yes, this sucks. We think our job is to make things better so we minimize the pain.
Yep.
I think that's something that you do well, which is somebody says, hey, John, there's a fire in the building and everybody's going nuts. And you go, wow, you acknowledge the emotion. Wow, that is horrible.
Yep.
Okay, now what next?
Yep.
And so many times we're so tempted either to just get buried in the negativity of something. Oh, this is horrible. And look at the consequence of this. And the building's probably going to come down. And if it does come down and you run away that way, or it's the other side, which is ignoring the fact that there's all this panic and emotion and just leading. And that actually creates disconnection. It's okay, says the book. And I try to practice. Acknowledge the emotion. This does suck.
Yep.
These are uncertain times. And now here's where we're going to go next, or how we're going to approach getting a solution.
Yep. And Rich, we talked about this. I can't remember which conversation it was, but it reminds me where you were going with this is there's times where there's not a clear decision that needs to be made. And you're in the conference room with your executive team, and one person has one opinion, one person has another opinion, but we got to make a decision before we leave this room. And as the leader, you may have to make that decision, but it's also okay to say, I've heard what you all have to say. We have to make a decision here. This might not be the right decision, but we got to make one. I respect your opinion, I'm going to make this call right now. And if it doesn't work, a week later, 2 weeks later, whatever, you got to be able to come back in and go, guys, yeah, made the wrong call. Maybe we should have done that or that. That's just the openness of communication that really exists there.
That's an example also of if you can't say what you just said,
yep.
Which is, hey guys, a decision needs to be made. I'm going to go in this direction. I know not everybody agrees. It may not work out.
Yep.
You'll know if you have a good culture if when it doesn't work out, people don't play a gotcha game.
Yep.
If they go, oh, I told you, I actually said solution A and you went with solution B, you should have listened to me next time. That's actually a culture of low vulnerability and everybody armoring up. Right. When we're all in it together, there is no scorecard. There is no pride in
yep.
a failure because somebody didn't do it your way and you're going to say, I told you.
Yeah. Rich, I'd love for you to break down, because I think certainly people should read the book. But I want to just break down the title of the book with you for a second, because I think it says a lot.
Yeah.
Dare to lead. Why would I dare to lead? I am a leader. I want to lead. Brave work, tough conversations, whole hearts. It says a lot. Break down for me when you hear that title, Dare to Lead, Brave Work, Tough Conversations, Whole Hearts, how that resonates with you.
I'd say first, in Dare to Lead, there's vulnerability in stepping up and leading. Specifically that you may be wrong. Maybe it isn't the right direction. Maybe when we lead, maybe somebody won't follow. And there's vulnerability. I'll be out on an island. There is something daring about leading. And if we move on to brave work, I think there is something about leading where people want to go places that others have not been. It's not just this factory assembly line type of work. It's brave work that requires courage to go somewhere. And Berné talks about there's no place where courage is required where vulnerability didn't exist. She actually asked a whole military troop that. Can anybody give me an example of where you saw courage expressed where there was no vulnerability? And nobody raised their hand. So it's doing the brave work, having the tough conversations. I already read the quote where she said, you have to have hard conversations even when you're not ready to. Yep. When those hard conversations present themselves, don't worry about over preparing, just be in them. Yep. And then whole hearts is a whole nother piece of her work. She has another book called, I think it's Atlas of the Heart, that really goes into whole heart. She speaks to in that 20-minute TED talk that I opened with, and you'd said you'd seen also. I didn't know you saw it, by the way. She speaks to the wholehearted. And those are people who believe they're worthy of love and belonging. And in her research, she found out that the core difference between people who were wholehearted and were not was the people who were wholehearted believed they were worthy of love and belonging. The people who were striving and didn't believe they were worthy of it, armored up, didn't practice vulnerability, felt disconnection as a result of it.
Yeah. When I read the title, I love the way you ended that with whole hearts. To me, and again, sometimes we've had so many amazing guests. I forget which guest we're talking to about these different conversations. It might have been Matt Shoop recently. You got to lead with your heart.
Mike Hopkins was another one who spoke to that,
Yeah,
leading
Mike
with
Hopkins
love.
absolutely was another one. I remember that vividly because if you lead with your heart, the tough conversation's a lot easier. It's a lot easier to have right now without preparing because the people know that you care about them. You've already established a level of trust. It's not easy, Rich, to have a tough conversation when somebody doesn't trust you. It's almost impossible to have an effective, tough conversation because they just think you're out to get them and they don't trust you. They think you have an ulterior motive. It just doesn't work. So, to me, a lot of what we're talking about here is can you lead with a whole heart? And if you do lead with a whole heart, you will exhibit the kinds of behaviors that we're talking about that, in my opinion, are essential to lead going into the future.
I like that. And you threw a ball in my court on to break some of those down. I'm going to throw a ball in your court.
All right.
I'm going to read you a quote off of page 109 from the book that I'd love for you to reflect on. And I know you're not prepared for this, but I think this will resonate for you.
Okay.
Rewarding others rather than seeking to be rewarded is the only way to continue to grow within an organization. Let me read it to you again as you gather your thoughts. Rewarding others rather than seeking to be rewarded is the only way to continue to grow within an organization. Can you, what comes to mind for you? Can you reflect on that?
Yeah. First off, I don't personally, you just need to think through it a little bit more, but I don't like the way it says it's the only way to grow within an organization. I've seen people grow in the organizations that do the complete opposite of that.
Just reward themselves or
They
seeking
reward themselves,
recognition
they
and
promote
attention. And
themselves, they promote themselves over others. Next thing you know, they're promoted. How did this person get? So I've seen it, but I'll tell you what, I don't care about being promoted in an organization. To me, that part of the conversation doesn't really work for me. But to reward others, seek to reward others versus yourself is the way you build trust. To me, like being able to help people achieve their goals and reward them for it, or they get the recognition for it and you don't, is a rewarding experience in and of itself, first of all. You build trust with that person, second of all. I think too much in our society, especially in the workplace, I've seen way too many interpersonal conflicts where people are struggling for power. They're struggling for that recognition. And it's quite a turnoff, to be honest with you. And when you have the complete opposite, where the leader or colleagues are helping each other get rewarded and they don't really care about themselves, you get it back tenfold. The other way, when everybody's trying to help you succeed and you get the recognition and the level of trust you build and the relationships you build. So for me, it's more about the feeling that you get, the impact you feel you're making, which has been a big change for me. So
So
I guess,
you absolutely practice what's in that. We've often heard leaders recognize others when things go well, and leaders take responsibility when things don't go so well.
yeah,
So if we play that out and we go, let's take the two options within that. Mike gets a whole bunch of recognition, and you go up on stage with him, and you're going, "Hey, I am so glad I gave you advice over the last several years, and you took it, and you implemented what my ideas were so well. That was awesome. How does that go? That's
Good.
horrible. Not only is that a bad look, that is not being a good leader, is having to seek that recognition and taking credit. Good leaders give recognition when things go well. Now, I also know you to be someone that if things don't go so well, you're not going to be the person who says, Mike's the CEO. That decision really rested with him. I may be able to help you guys out, though, from the hole that was dug from that poor decision. You don't do that. You would be the guy who comes in and almost comes over the top and says, hey, guys, that was me. I called that shot. I was part of it. It was misguided. We're going to do better.
Yep.
Just even characterizing these two opportunities as a leader that you have in this story with Mike, it's laughable. You were laughing when I was doing it. It's laughable to have to strive so hard to take credit or shift blame.
Yeah. And it's interesting you say that. How many times have we heard? I feel like 100 times, but maybe it's only 20. I have no idea. Somebody who's upset because somebody took credit for what they did.
Yes.
That's what we're really talking about at the end of the day. And there are those ego reward vultures that don't get it. And I want to flip this back to the entrepreneur. If the entrepreneur is one of them, that's a problem. And it's very hard to build a culture of an organization that's going to perform if you're displaying what you're talking about. Oh, that was all me. I did this. And then when something goes wrong, it's, oh, yeah, this guy, let's fire him. He didn't do the right thing. And so you have to build that right culture. And you have to, again, dare to lead, but with whole heart and jump in. So I really feel like that connects. Last thing I think, Rich, I have for you, this book strikes a massive chord with you. I know it's one that you're deeply passionate about. I know it's a general question, but why? Why does this book, why do entrepreneurs need to finish this review here, go pick up a book and read it versus just listen to this 20-minute review? Why do you feel so passionate about the book and why people should actually pick it up and read the whole thing?
Give me a second. You're going to need to cut this because I want to go to a quote because I have an answer.
I'm not cutting anything. You got to think about it right now on the spot. I want to know in your heart, your whole heart, why you're passionate about this book.
She's got an area in here, and I'm not able to find it quickly, but she's got an area in here on one of the chapters that speaks to growing up and learning that you had to play small and not believing in yourself and not wanting to be vulnerable in that way. And my story from being the kid on the schoolyard playground who got picked last in everything. It didn't matter if it was throw a football, if it was I'll race you to the bike rack, if we were doing kickball. It didn't matter what it was. I was either the guy that kept picked last or it was Carl Beeler, one or the other. And what I learned in that was the way to protect myself was to not show up because you couldn't pick me last if I didn't show up in the lineup. You couldn't hurt me so long as I played small. And that was something I learned in elementary school. What's really interesting, and I don't even know if I've shared this with you yet, that over the course of the last year, the gift that we get as we get older is self-discovery. And over the course of the last year, I put a puzzle piece together that leadership became a way for acceptance for me. When I was a sophomore in high school and did English tutoring and started to attain leadership opportunities. And in high school, I was leading the church youth group play with our youth group minister, and I was co-directing a play of adults with him. And I just kept gravitating to leadership opportunities because so long as I was leading, you couldn't leave me out. Because if I created the group, you couldn't uninvite me. So I definitely have some childhood stuff, and I think we all do. And those that don't believe they do just haven't done the work to put the puzzle pieces together. They say that you live your first 10 years and then you live your next 80 getting over it.
Yep.
And if you don't know what you're getting over, you may want to do some of the work to put some puzzle pieces together. And I continue to do some of this work. And this book unlocks for me the opportunity to be my authentic self, to be able to be vulnerable, that it's okay if I'm not picked. And there are things I am going to get picked for, and there are things I'm not going to get picked for. And I don't even need to try to act like I'm good at things. I wanted to try, John. I wanted to act like I was good at stuff I wasn't good at because I wanted to be accepted, because I
Mhm.
didn't want to be picked last this time. And then you always get the guy who's a superstar athlete who would pick either Carl Beeler or me first
Yep.
because he wanted to be like philanthropic. And that was almost as embarrassing to know that he was doing it just out of because he's a good guy. He wasn't doing it because you were actually a first round draft pick. There's so much stuff in that I have worked through, and this book has helped me work through some of that in accepting my strengths and my weaknesses and being comfortable putting my vulnerabilities out there. And I wish I could find the quote. I think the story you were looking for me to share, and I don't think you knew what story you would get, but the story and the passion you were looking for me to share from the heart, you've got. But there's a subtitle of one of the chapters that speaks directly to that, is playing small to cover up our vulnerabilities and what the solutions are. And the book is chock full of them.